Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the much discussed topic of different watercolor brands. One of the most common questions I see asked by beginners on different forums and pages is what brand of paint they should upgrade to. With regards to that, it really does depend on a very important question, and that is, what paint are you upgrading from? Watercolor paints vary from the really cheap watercolors that you can buy in school stationery stores that are suitable for kindergarten children, right up to top-end professional grade paints with many different ranges and budgets in between. The palettes I have in my studio are by no means all of the ones that are available, and I'm just going to discuss certain things with regards to the paints that I have personally had experience with and that I've got in my studio. Firstly, let's discuss the difference between tubes and pans of paint. You will find that many brands, such as the one that I've got here, Daniel Smith, are available on the shelves in both tubes and pans. The paints that are in the pans are exactly the same paints as what can be found in the tube. In fact, some of these are a little bit shiny at the moment because I've just done a refill of some of the colors in my palette that were running low, and all I've done is I've taken my tubes and I've poured them into the pans to top them up. They will be a little bit tacky and soft at the moment, but if I leave it to dry overnight, the pans will all harden and be ready to spray and reuse tomorrow morning. So why buy tubes then if the paints are exactly the same? Firstly, if you buy the tubes, they do work out more cost effective in the long run, particularly if you buy the larger size tubes as I do. I will always buy, for the colors that I like the most, I will always buy the 15 milliliter tubes because then I can fill up these pans multiple times from a single tube. So they work out cheaper in the long run than buying individual pans. Having your paints in pans is extremely convenient to be able to just close the lid and move them from place to place if you are on the move. But with your paints that are in pans, it is a good idea to spray them first with a spray bottle of water just to activate the paints. It does make it easier for the paint to come onto your brush and be able to use if you have moistened them down a little bit beforehand. If I am going to do a large painting where I'm going to use quite a lot of a particular color, then I might squeeze some of the paint directly from the tubes onto my palette. They do activate a lot easier if they are already wet straight from the tube, so that is an advantage. If you are sure that you're going to use the paint in a particular sitting, then it is easier to use them straight from the tube, but I don't like wastage. I wouldn't want any of the paint left over on my palette at the end that I would end up washing away, because then that would just be wastage and a waste of money. It's pretty easy to fill the pans in the palette from the tube. Here's a video of me filling up one of the pans earlier on today. You can leave the pans inside the palette whilst you are filling them, or if you fear that you might cross-contaminate the colors, you can take the pans out of the palette, fill them up, and then replace them back into the palette when you're done. I like to squeeze a little bit of the paint into the palette, and then because I don't want any air bubbles and I do like my paints to lie flat at the end, I'll use a toothpick just to smooth out the paint once it's in the palette. And then I will leave the palettes slightly ajar for a day or two until the paints have hardened. Now let me explain two terms that are often used in the naming and branding of different paints, and that is to describe a paint as either a student grade or a professional grade paint. Basically, at the end of the day, the cost of a paint comes down to the amount of pigment that you're getting in each sample. The pigment is the thing that costs the most money, and so every sample of paint will have a certain degree of pigment in it, as well as a certain degree of filler. So the filler to pigment ratio at the end of the day is the thing that decides the price. Most of your top brands of paints will have both a student grade paint and a professional grade paint, with the student grade one being the cheaper one because it's got more filler and less pigment in it. With the Winsor Newton brand, what I've got here is the Winsor Newton Cotman range. So with Winsor Newton, the Cotman range is their student grade paint, And then they have a different range that is called the Winsor Newton Professional Grade. The pigment colors are the same, but the professional grade will have a higher degree of pigment, therefore will be more expensive. Daniel Smith, on the other hand, only makes a professional grade paint. There is no distinguishing between them, so all Daniel Smith watercolor paints are regarded to be professional grade. That being said, this Winsor Newton Cotman set, it started with 12 colors and I've subsequently added a few extra. This Cotman set was the first set of paints that I bought, and I have to say that this is a super starter set of paints and would do someone very proud for a very long time if you were beginning your watercolor journey. What I've got here is 3 brands of student grade paint that I've got in my studio, and every single one of them I would be happy to use. The Winsor Newton Cotman I've already discussed. Then I've got Sennelier and Mungyo. Sennelier also is a brand that has got 2 different ranges. Their student grade paint is called La Petite or La Petite Aquarelle, and that is the cheaper range. That is what this one is here, but that being said, this is still an excellent quality of paint. And then the professional grade is called Sennelier La Aquarelle. Those will be more expensive and have got a higher pigment ratio. The one thing that is a little bit confusing in the naming is that Mungyo here, its name says Mungyo Professional Watercolor, but I definitely wouldn't put it in the same realm as the other paints that claim to be professional. I would definitely put Mungyo in amongst all the other student grade paints that there are. This is the Mugyo 48 pan set. They do have a little bit of cracking on them, as you can see, and that for me is an indication that there is quite a chalkiness to them, that there is quite a lot of filler. But that being said, the Mungyo paints are highly pigmented, and as soon as you moisten them up and you start to use them, they do have a very nice creamy consistency, and they do moisten up quickly, and they are easy to use. The one person who I follow who uses Mungyo paints exclusively is Becky Cow. Have a look for her on YouTube if you haven't already. I absolutely adore her sketches that she does, and she uses Mungyo all the time, and there's nothing wrong with her sketches. They're fabulous. And then just another interesting thing to note about the different brands of paints is the binder or the filler that they use to bind the pigments together. Most of your brands like Winsor, Newton, Daniel Smith, etc. will use a substance called gum arabic to bind the paints together. With the gum arabic, when the paints get dry, they do get quite hard, and then they can easily be activated again with water. A brand like Sennelier stands out on its own in that it has a honey-based binder. And so the Sennelier paints hardly ever go completely hard. I found that that's a bit of a challenge where I live in Thailand, where the humidity is quite high. The Sennelier paints will dry. I mean, this one is not leaking or running by any means, but it needs to be left open or ajar so that it can dry. And if you do use them and then close the lid and then move with them, the colors actually can run out of the wells because of the honey-based filler inside of them. So I don't think that there's any better or worse. These ones re-wet much more easily than the gum arabic ones, but they've got the disadvantage of staying a little bit tacky at all times. These ones can be a little bit harder to activate, but they are a little bit more reliable with how they are going to behave in all weather conditions. This is the Korean brand Mijello that I bought on a sale last year, and I just really wanted the opportunity to give them a go. Mijello comes in 2 different ranges. The Mijello Mission Silver is the student grade paint, and then the Mijello Mission Gold is the professional grade paint. I bought the Mission Gold as a treat to myself and so that I could give them a go. The set came with this palette that you fill yourself with the 5 milliliter tubes, which I then put in the order that they suggested. And now I've got extra paint here to fill in the wells when I need to. This is really a super professional grade paints. They are quite a lot more pigmented than the Daniel Smiths that I use most of the time. So they take a little bit getting used to because they are so bright. You use a lot less of them. Turn them down, and some of the colors I feel I need to turn down a little bit because they don't look completely realistic. But really they are a super grade of paint, and the palette that they come with is lovely. But Daniel Smith is the brand that I use the most. Really, it's just because I've started collecting them. I like the brand. So when I'm going to buy more colors, I buy within the Daniel Smith range. That's not to say that Daniel Smith is the best by any means, but they've got a lot of information on their website. It's easy to investigate the different colors and properties. So this is the one that I use the most. I buy the tubes and I fill up the pans as required. And then just my last tip for today with regards to your watercolors that are in pans. I strongly suggest that when you are finished using your watercolor pans, if they are still moist, which they probably will be, my suggestion is do not close the lid and then leave them to dry that way, particularly if you are in even a mildly humid area. The reason is if you close the lid, they can't dry out naturally, and they can then easily grow mold, and the mold can grow into the surface of the paints, and then it is quite a disaster to actually try and get rid of them. You can get rid of the mold by scraping it off or running it under water, but it's not something that you want to happen. So what I do when I'm finished painting is I use something. If I leave it open, it just gets covered in dust and dog hair. So once I'm finished painting, I put something there that's going to hold the lid ajar, and then I will leave it like that or cover it with a cloth or something so that the air can get in but not the dust until the paint is dry. I've heard people say that if they leave their paints open too dry that they can crack. That can happen, but that's not something to be concerned about. Any cracks in the surface of your watercolors, when you spray them again and activate them, they'll either disappear or the cracks don't affect the usage of the paints at all. So I would rather have cracks in my paint than mold for sure. So I hope that you found this video useful. If you've got any further questions with regards to watercolors, brands, etc., by all means drop the question in the comments box below and I'll make sure to answer them. Until next time, bye for now.